Okay, before class starts, so again, per my previous announcement, I have a faculty meeting at 3 o'clock, so office hours are canceled. I'll hang around and chat a bit to ask any, or actually answer any questions you have. And actually, on Monday, next week, Monday, I won't be able to do a live broadcast because of an all day training from 8 to 4 p.m. Oh, shoot. But yeah, so I have a training all that day, so therefore I can't be there for a live lecture. I will pre-record my lecture for next week Monday and put it on YouTube. And so yeah, just letting you know in advance. I'll also send out an announcement before, maybe the day before, and I'll also announce that on Friday as well. Okay, so okay, time for class. And let's try Top Hat. Okay, hopefully it's not as buggy, but let's try this. And just a warm-up question, again, none of the live questions count for points against you or for you. Okay, let's see how this works. And looks like most of you got it correct. So again, anatomy is talking about overall structures in the body, but histology, we're looking at tissues specifically. All right, so now we're kind of warmed up. Let's go. So we did we finished on epithelial tissue on Monday, but now we're going on to connective tissue. And actually for muscle and nervous, I'm not going to have a lecture on muscle and nervous for exam 1. So for muscle tissue and nervous tissue, what I want you to study is open stacks. Just those sections, they're very brief, and that's why I'm keeping it limited to for exam 1. Why? Because muscle tissue we actually cover in depth for exam 2, and nervous tissue we cover in depth for exam 3. So don't worry about them so much for exam 1. Just keep it limited to open stacks chapter 4. All right, so the thing about connective tissue, it's just kind of like a catch-all term because there are so many different types of connective tissues and they have so many different types of functions. And again, something I talked about was the extracellular matrix. So what is the extracellular matrix? Or I think both Martini and OpenStax just call it matrix. It provides the support for all the cells of the connective tissue. So connective tissue has cells. Remember, tissues are made out of cells. But this is the stuff outside of the cells, and these aren't cells themselves. They're important for the overall function of the tissue, but they're not actually the living cells. But again, they're not only there to keep cells in place, they're also very important in terms of functional support as well. So the thing is that connective tissue, in addition to having specialized functions, when they're in membrane, they also provide support and structure for epithelial tissues. Now to review, what's the extracellular matrix? So I like to kind of say it's like setting the foundation of a building. So you need solid things like rebar, but you also, in a concrete building, you also have that cement as well, right? So to get a solid building foundation, what you have is solid parts and also something to kind of hold it together and solidify and glue it together. So again, what we have in our extracellular matrix in our tissues or connective tissues are solid protein fibers plus something you call a ground substance. And together they make up the matrix of a connective tissue. All right, so again, it's just like saying the foundation, so you can build upon that foundation and have all your epithelial tissue or other cells that aren't part of the connective tissue. All right, so then the type of fibers, these are all proteins. So collagen is actually a very strong type of protein. As you can see here in this cartoon, it's forming all these little bundles that are kind of like taking a bunch of silk strands or rope strands and putting them all together. So here we have collagen arranged in a linear fashion, but then we have reticular fibers. So notice that they're not all in this line somewhat parallel to each other and along each other's side. They're kind of crisscrossing in 2D, and at least in this picture it's 2D, but in reality in your tissues, when you have a reticular fiber, they're actually a special type of collagen that's linked into a 3D meshwork. We'll get more into that later. So then elastic fibers, I did cover that protein called elastin. So elastin, when you don't have any stretch or tension in it, it looks kind of wadded up like this. Or have you ever seen, I wish I had one of those like I remember seeing my little cousin, he had these little like rubber bands shaped like dinosaurs. So when they're relaxed, they look like a dinosaur, but you can stretch them out to form a very skinny structure. So elastic fibers are kind of like that. They have a kind of globular shape when they're not being stretched. But when you have a bunch of elastin fibers linked together and you stretch them, then they can extend and become elongated like you see here. Now, ground substance, again, there's not just one single, yeah, silly bands. Yeah, that I should buy some for a demonstration. Okay, so it's fluid and gel-like, but the thing is that it's not just one single ground substance isn't the same between all different types of connective tissues. They're not just one singular ground substance. It's just describing the part that's not those collagen and protein fibers. So again, these often include these compounds right here, or actually categories of compounds. So proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and glycosaminoglycans. I gotta highlight that different. It's throwing me off. But glyco referring to sugar. So remember, like sugar likes to hold on to water and kind of keep it bound or like through those hydrogen bonds. Water is attracted to sugar. Sugar attracts water. So this is why the ground substance in a lot of these, not all the connective tissues have a gel-like ground substance. For example, like bone tissue, very dense and not very flexible, right? It is flexible to extent, but definitely not like a jelly-like substance. The thing is that they often include these things that hold on to moisture. That's what I'm getting at here with this slide. But again, the other thing is that ground substance is not just one type of substance. It actually is a catch-all term. All right, so again, extracellular matrix, you have these protein fibers plus a ground substance lays the foundation for a connective tissue. And again, all the connective tissues, the extracellular matrix may be different between them, the cells may be different, but they all have some sort of matrix that makes up a type of connective tissue. All right, so connective tissues, again, it's a catch-all term, it's a big tent term, many different types of connective tissues, but they fit into at least one of the three broad categories. So you have connective tissue proper. So these are ones that have pretty easily identifiable protein fibers and ground substance. So you have loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. Now this is also very broad terms as well. Then you have supportive connective tissue, and this includes cartilage and bone. Now, cartilage and bone, we're going to run out of time today. We can't cover cartilage in time, so I'm actually going to kick cartilage to exam 2. So cartilage, you should know it's a supportive connective tissue, but I won't really cover it in depth on exam 1. I'll save that for exam 2. And bone, we have a whole chapter on bone tissue coming up for exam 2, so don't go too in depth. Just know that cartilage and bone are supportive connective tissues. And then there are fluid connective tissues, so things like blood, and I mean, everyone knows what blood is, but lymph is also a fluid connective tissue. All right, so what's connective tissue proper? So these are things that are considered like, okay, they're pretty prototypical. These are like normal, not special cases of connective tissues. But the thing about connective tissues, they can contain specialized cells, meaning that these cells that I'm going to talk about, they all have their specialized functions. They don't do all the functions of every other cell in these categories. So fibroblasts, fibrocytes, adipocytes, all of these are connective tissue proper cells. So in the Martini textbook, they showed this picture, or actually this is the OpenStax picture. So as you can see, all these connective tissues, you have all these protein fibers right here, and you have all these cells interwoven or actually kind of hanging out between these fibers. And this is an error, common misconception. Like people look at this picture and they say, okay, these cells are just suspended in air with a bunch of protein fibers like ropes. But things that you also have that ground substance. They're not really showing it. Again, that ground substance has a lot of water and chemicals, but things that they're just showing it as blank space for simplicity's sake here. And as you can see, there's many different types of shapes of these cells. This is actually a whole adipocyte. And this is a mesenchymal cell. Oh, they spell it interesting. Maybe it's a different language. And then also a fibrocyte. So as you can see, what I'm getting at here, remember from the H&E staining, that the eosin stains the nuclei. So every time you see a nuclei, that's the nucleus of a cell, this dark purple spots. So as you can see, the cells aren't arranged like epithelial cells. You can't notice that they're not all neatly in a row, and that there's many different types of cells. They're not evenly dispersed. So connective tissue can have a variety of cells within one connective tissue. And this is the Martini example. So what is it showing? It's just trying to show you all the possible types of connective tissue proper cells in one picture. Now, if you take a slice of any sort of tissue in the body, are you going to look at it under a microscope and see this? No, this is again like that cell picture in chapter 3. It's more like just showing you all the different types of cells that can be in a connective tissue. Just like that chapter 3 cell picture shows you all the possible organelles. So it's kind of like seeing these kind of books in a nature book, or these images, like when you see all these birds. When you go on a hike, or go into the forests of Hawaii, are you going to take a picture and expect to see all of these birds in the picture at once? You'd be very rare and very lucky if you can catch all of these, even a few of these. So same with this picture. So don't think this looks like an actual slice of a real tissue. It's just showing you all the different types of cells. Now, there are some cells I'll ask you to focus on and some I won't, but I'll get to that later on in this lecture. All right, so what I'm getting at here, look at the different variety, shapes, and sizes, and they're more about their shapes and sizes. They also have different functions, but they are very diverse. That's what I'm getting at here. So connective tissues are very diverse, but they're diverse because all these connective tissues and all these connective tissue cells have specialized functions. They're not jacks of all trades. All right, so let's talk about fibroblasts and fibrocytes. So again, these are connective tissue proper cells. Now, this is an image of a fibroblast, and actually pretty much like fibroblasts are abundant. Like you can take pretty much almost every tissue in your body, throw it into a grinder, and if you just sort the cells, you'll definitely find fibroblasts. It's very easy to purify fibroblasts in the lab. So this is the most abundant set connective tissue type. So you find fibroblasts everywhere in your body, and they secrete all types of the fibers. So they are kind of very important in secreting those solid protein fibers that make up the matrix of extra connective tissue. So this is another reason why you find these in practically every tissue in your body. And they easily divide and regenerate. So again, this is another reason why they're very abundant, because they're needed everywhere. And they can develop into more mature fibrocytes. So again, this is where it gets kind of tricky. They both start with fibro and they both secrete fibers. But what's the difference between a blast and a cyte? So this is a term you'll see constantly throughout anatomy and physiology and histology, blast and cyte. So blast is what you call so I approximate it to like the immature version. It's not the final form yet. It's like the embryonic form of a cell. It's not quite fully mature. It's still developing. It's still a cell. It's still active. It's still alive, but it's not quite fully developed. Now, the thing is that fibroblasts, or when you have something that's a blast, it also tends to, because it's immature and relatively young, these can still undergo mitosis and make more cells. Now, cyte is a common root word and suffix that just means cell. So whenever you see cyte, it's cell. Like cytology, that's the study of cells. But with cells, the thing is that if it has a blast form, cyte is the mature form. So things develop. So when a cell starts as something blast, it ends up as a something cyte. And then it's finally mature. So blast always comes before cyte when a cell is aging and maturing and developing. So here's the precursor form. So myoblasts, what do they develop into? They develop into myocytes. Osteoblasts, what do you think they differentiate into? Well, they eventually develop into osteocytes. How about chondroblasts? How about chondrocytes? Lymphoblasts, they eventually become lymphocytes. Fibroblasts, what do they become? So what do you call a mature fibroblast? Okay, lock in your answers. All right, let's see how everyone did. Most of you said fibrocyte or fibrocytes, and fibrocytes is also correct, but yes, fibrocyte is correct. So again, blast becomes before cyte. Blast immature, cyte fully mature. So again, fibroblast, the mature form is a fibrocyte. So it's okay, like fibroblasts eventually become fibrocytes, but why do we have these two different categories? Well, what are the differences? So again, fibroblasts, you find them everywhere in any connective tissue in your body. Fibrocytes are the second most abundant, so they're still pretty common. So they're found in all connective tissue proper. And the thing about fibroblasts, this is why I use the young versus mature analogy. So fibroblasts are pretty young. They still have a lot of energy. So these are the ones that most actively secrete the solid protein fibers that make up extracellular matrix. So these are the ones that secrete collagen and elastin. Whereas fibrocytes, they're no longer they're active in terms of secreting these proteins. Now they're more about maintaining these fibers and the fibers in the extracellular matrix. So it's kind of like having a young construction worker who's doing all the heavy lifting, and then a more retired or senior one that's kind of just like maintaining, making sure things are repaired, and instead of building new stuff, they're actually just maintaining existing structures. So that's the big difference between fibroblasts and fibrocytes. They both are involved in maintaining the connective tissue solid protein fibers, but the blasts are the ones that make new protein fibers, whereas the cytes are more about maintenance. Okay, next we're going to talk about adipocytes. Now, adipocytes, so here's a not electron. This is just a regular microscopy stain of this. But look at this. It kind of looks like styrofoam or like little bubbles that are all together, right? So adipose is the medical term for fat. So you probably know, so again, cyte meaning cells. So adipocyte means fat cells. Now, what you have here is a huge fat droplet, and this is like a cartoon of that. So what you're actually seeing here is like, it's not empty space. So what we have with this microscope slide, well, when you make a microscope slide of adipose tissue, when you actually embed it in that paraffin and make all the slices and stain it, the fat actually washes away. So what you see, this is why it looks like a bunch of gaps when you look at it under a microscope. So things that they store, those lipids and fats, right? So triglycerides and cholesterol, the ones we learned about in the biochemistry part of our lectures. But again, look at this. So what do you think this dark purple part is? What appears dark purple in the H&E stain? A nucleus, right? And actually you can see some nuclei here, but why don't you see them all in the plane? Well, the thing is that there's so much fat that this is what we call a lipid droplet. So there's so much fat, triglycerides, and cholesterols in this white adipose tissue, it's actually kind of smushing the nucleus off to the side. So in Tokyo, in the subways, I guess before, but I heard from my friends there, now it's all like the trains are super empty now. But what they used to have are all these subway pushers. Like there's so many people commuting, they would actually have people whose job is to actually push people so as many people can get on the train as at once. And it's really funny too, because what you see is sometimes these people end up who are already in the train end up smashed up against the windows in that subway train. So those nuclei, those nucleuses inside the cells in a white fat cell, it's kind of like that. There's so much fat in there, it's actually pushing them off to the side of against the plasma membrane. So that's why you see it looks like that when you look at it under a microscope. The nuclei is all the way squished off to a side.